let's return to our top story, and really it's an issue that's top of mind for every South African, and that is the state of electricity in our country. On Friday, the North Gauteng High Court ordered government that they had 60 days to exempt hospitals, schools and police stations from power cuts. The Presidency and the Minister of Public Enterprises have now indicated they will be urgently appealing this ruling, citing concerns about the pressure this might put on the grid. So do they have a point? I'm joined now by Professor of Physics, Hartmut Winkler from the University of Johannesburg. Prof, always great to chat to you. You know, if we think back a few months, we know that the Health Department in particular actually supports ring-fencing hospitals, exempting them from load shedding. And they have been trying to do this with varied success. It's not a simple process, is it?
No, it's not. Unfortunately, if you switch off a whole suburb, you can't just switch on an entity within there. It's a bit like if you have a water pipe which gets cut off at the source, you won't suddenly get water appearing at one of the outlets. So the only way to get around that would be to let the electricity flow throughout the suburb, and you then have to switch off individual little units, such as almost like households. And that's just completely impractical. So that's not going to work. The only way this whole thing can work, where the government can meet what's expected to them according to this ruling, is to provide alternative power to those entities, police stations, schools, and hospitals. Now that sounds fine, except that it's something which, first of all, is going to be very expensive, and secondly, it's going to take quite a long time. And to tell the government that they must have everything in order in 60 days, I think even with the best will and even with all the financial resources in place, I don't think that's achievable.
Do you agree with the government's argument, and their reason for challenging this is that actually exempting hospital, schools and police stations could risk the grid in some way? And if so, how?
No, I don't think it's going to put excessive pressure on the grid. What it would certainly mean is that it might complicate the situation, especially if one went the way where one actually needs to keep certain suburbs on. But I don't think that's what they're doing. I think that argument itself is not going to hold because But what could then happen is that you can always fight switching off the grid or a grid collapse by simply implementing higher and higher stages of load shedding. And nobody wants that. And that's certainly the one concern a lot of people will have, is that, well, if you let off a certain sector of society, what about the rest? Because somebody will have to carry that. Yeah. But as I said, I think the solution out of this is to simply provide extra power to those entities, probably in the form of solar panels and diesel generators. Those are really the only two ways one can get around that. But that, unfortunately, is not something which can just be done very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, if it was, you know, the simplest route is, as you say, to cut off entire areas where those schools or police stations or hospitals are. Which would mean that those areas do not get affected by load shedding, which is fabulous for them if you happen to live near a school or a hospital, and also obviously desperately important that hospitals have power. But would it ultimately then mean, if it let's say that plan was put into place, wouldn't it simply mean that people like you and I, who don't necessarily live next to a hospital, would end up in a much more extreme level of load shedding to kind of make up the load?
Yes, exactly. And if one thinks about it carefully, who in this country doesn't live within about 5-kilometer radius of a school or something? It's probably almost nobody. So ultimately, I just don't think this thing will work in practice at all. So based on that, and I think where the government would have a case is simply by saying that, well, we'd like to have backup power for all these entities, but we simply can't do it in 60 days. I think there they would have a much better case. What I suspect this might amount to is some sort of, well, should we call it Stalingrad tactics? Because given that this court judgment can't be carried out, I think the one way of getting around this is simply just to keep on appealing on technicalities. Ultimately, I think the government sees this as a way of buying some additional time. I think they hope that in the course of the next few years, they would be able to install some of that extra power. It would in any case make sense to something like a police station, for example, if they had solar panels on the roof. Okay, the installation cost will cost a bit, but after a few years, they won't be paying nearly as much for electricity as they are now. So in terms of long-term strategy, I think that's the way not just those police stations and schools are going, but I think that's the way the whole country is heading.
Yeah, I mean,
but that needs time.
Yeah, and therein lies the rub. It's a matter of time. We've been told that this winter is going to be really tough in terms of power supply. We are hoping to hear that by the end of the year, we're told things might start looking up slightly, possibly power coming from Mozambique. But I want to ask you for your comment on the power status right now. I mean, it's Monday night. We're in stage 6 load shedding, but we went into stage 6 on a quiet Sunday afternoon. What does that say about the stages we may find ourselves in during the worst of winter on a busy day?
Yes, well, at some point, I'm pretty sure we're going to go down to stage 8. I think the hope is that we're not going to exceed stage 8 during this winter. But on average, if we use the currency of load shedding stages, on average, this country is about 2 stages worse off this year to what it was last year. Last year, we went down to stage 6. Therefore, I expect we're going to go down to stage 8. We can't predict exactly when it will happen because we will have phases when the power stations are behaving themselves. We're going to have phases where the power stations are going to be breaking down a lot. And it's going to be during one of those stages where we have multiple breakdowns in the middle of winter that we are likely to hit stage 8.
I mean, currently, I think we're on over 19,000 kilowatts of breakdowns and nearly 5,000 kilowatts for planned maintenance, which takes us to around 25,000. That's about half the grid currently offline, and we're not even in the worst of winter. There are a number of plans that have been put forward. We know that they're trying to drive the old power stations as hard as they can. But of course, as you say, they just keep breaking down. The other plan is, of course, for diesel. We know there are limits on how much diesel because you can only drive those open cycle gas turbines for so long. But is diesel our most realistic option to try and keep some of the lights on some of the time this winter?
I think they'll have enough diesel to see us through the winter. But yes, that does mean that these plants using diesel are supposed to be used as emergency when something goes drastically wrong somewhere else. If they're going to be running essentially full time, then you don't have that sort of a backup when something else goes wrong. Then you really have to go very quickly into higher stages of load shedding. It's certainly not good. It's going to cost a lot. I mean, last year, or at least for the last financial year, Eskom ran out of money for diesel, which is why we had unusually high stages of load shedding at the beginning of this year. And the way it's happening right now, they're going to be running out of money for diesel much sooner. So they're certainly happy about this 30 billion that they're getting, but that too may not last entirely through the whole financial year, but it could last us until Christmas if we're lucky.
All right. Well, thank you so much for speaking to us, Professor Hartmut Winkler from the University of Johannesburg.